Welcome back to another episode of Before You Buy, the show where we give you some straight up gameplay and our first impressions of the latest games releasing. Got a question for you. How anime do you feel today? Well, stick around and I'll tell you how anime you're gonna feel, at very least. Hi folks, it's Falcon. Today we're talking Persona 3 Reload. 2006's Persona 3 was one of those foundational games for a lot of people. Back when it first came out, this game completely changed the trajectory of the entire Persona sub-series, and it's a game that every future Persona release is pretty much modeled after. The original was an all-time classic, but even as somebody who was fascinated by it back when it first came out, I mean, you guys know how much I enjoy a good JRPG. It's a tough game to go back to for various reasons. They even put it out on Steam, and it's like a port of a portable release, and it's I mean, it's Persona 3. It's great for that reason. But when you go back to it, it's just, I mean, you've experienced Persona 4 and 5. 5 in particular, which really goes well beyond what one would expect from this series back when Persona 3 came out. So that brings us to Persona 3 Reload, which is a full remake of the original game with the presentation and gameplay updates that later games in the series have brought to the table. In some ways, it is an extremely faithful remake of the original, and in other ways, it is a noticeable departure. Just to throw my overall thoughts out there, this is an excellent RPG that, like I alluded to in the intro, will test your anime proclivities. It's a nonetheless intriguing story, has an excellent combat system, fantastic graphic design, and if that sounds interesting to you, wow, do I got a lot to say to you. So this is a game whose 2006 origins show in quite a few ways, and it's missing some of the features from some of the re-releases of the original game, but overall I would say it's a really good remake of one of the most influential RPGs of the PS2 era. But let's wipe the slate clean. Let's say you're new to the series. What is Persona 3? Well, it's a JRPG, mostly, but it's also a life simulator, a dating sim, a dungeon crawler, and there's even some Pokemon DNA in there. I mean, officially, Persona is part of the Shin Megami Tensei series, which is arguably something Pokemon ripped off. And it's not like a monster catching game, but you do catch monsters. It's not your standard JRPG, but if you've played Persona 5, you're going to be right at home with this. You play as an unnamed protagonist who moves to Tatsumi Port Island to attend school. After exiting the train, you find yourself in the dark hour where creatures called shadows attack all of the living people. Soon you find yourself recruited by a group of teenagers capable of summoning beings known as personas who fight the shadows to protect the town. That's the gist of the plot. It starts off pretty episodic, but eventually a more cohesive narrative begins to form. The game is split into two main segments. During the day, you explore the town, you go to school, you make friends, you do various activities. You deal with your embarrassment of being an aging bird playing a game about teenagers going to high school. But you've been playing this series for well over 20 years at this point, so it's not your fault. The night segments, on the other hand, the dark hour, you explore this big old structure called the Tartarus, and you battle shadows with your personas. Your main character has the unique ability to use multiple personas, all of which belong to one arcana. If you've played like any Persona or Shin Megami Tensei game, you'll recognize the whole tarot card theme. The creatures you collect are based on mythology and religion. Gives the game a slightly subversive edge, at least back in the day. Major part of the daytime gameplay is forming bonds with everybody around you using social links. They represent your relationship values with the characters you meet. Increasing them makes it so your personas get stronger when they're combined, which is a great technique to use in battle because it packs a lot more of a wallop, especially if your targets are weak to whatever. That's probably your fastest and best way to power up personas, in fact. What makes this all trickier is each day is split up into periods, and you can only do so much for each part of the day, so time management is a big issue. You're constantly in a race to improve your skills, earn money, increase social links, blah, blah, blah. And then you have to be prepared for the full moon, which happens periodically and puts you against a boss shadow. If you're not ready for it, you're pretty much screwed. At least that's how it was in the original game. This version is a little more forgiving because it allows you to rewind to a place where you can grind if you find yourself stuck. It all comes together to make a pretty unusual RPG experience. Instead of exploring a giant world and going to various dungeons, you mostly just do stuff in the same few environments and develop relationships with the characters around town. There's only one real dungeon in the game, Tartarus, and it's made up of mostly randomly generated floors. During full moons, there's segments where you fight enemies outside of Tartarus, but the vast majority of the RPG side of the game is spent here, and it's also where the game feels the most archaic. There's a lot of floors with not a lot of variation variation here, so it starts to feel pretty samey pretty fast. It's not the most ambitious random generation I've seen either. It just boils down to plop down a few generic rooms, throw in an enemy, treasure chest or two, and there's some breakables also, and that's it. Gets repetitive quickly, but the game smartly keeps the floors relatively short, so you're always making progress. It's basically like if Persona 5 didn't have any actual dungeons, and all you had is mementos, which isn't necessarily bad, although I will say, I think mementos is a little better than this version. On the other hand, the combat system is just absolutely fantastic, and that's really what you're in Tartarus for anyway. It's fast, it's smartly streamlined in a lot of ways, it's really, really good. Persona 3 is the game that introduced the one more system, and while it's not quite as breakable as my beloved press turn system from the Shin Megami Tensei games, it's very satisfying. The basic gist is that everything from you and your party, they all have elemental weaknesses. If you hit an enemy with their weakness, they're knocked down, you get a free extra turn. Hit another enemy with their weakness, you get another turn. Knock everything down, you can do an all-out attack that does bonus damage to all the enemies on screen. If you've played Persona 4, particularly Persona 5, you definitely recognize this. I can think of several battles in Persona 5 where this was creatively utilized in the battle as a necessity, and it's just a lot of fun. It's lethal, it's quick, power can shift really rapidly, you can kill a lot of enemies in seconds, but if you're not careful, they can do the exact same thing to you. They'll exploit your weaknesses, they'll get a critical hit in, and that starts the domino effect. I mean, it's a lot of strategic stuff that you're going to have to do to compensate for this, because you can build around it, in all seriousness. When you're picking characters and armor, there are things you can do that vastly affect this. Overall, Persona 3 Reload is a lot easier than the original game for a lot of quality of life reasons, but it's also just not afraid to kill you and make you go back a few floors. It's one of those RPGs where if the main character dies, it's game over. And while that's normally pretty cruel in other RPGs, it feels especially punishing here because of the sometimes very random nature of battles. And here's the thing about improvements, changes, whatever you want to call it. Some of the things that may rub fans of the original game the wrong way are gonna be things that newcomers are gonna probably appreciate. One thing I think most people will agree is a net positive is you can control your entire party, which was added to Persona 3 Portable, and it's carried over here. In the original version of the game, you only had direct control over your character, and every other character just followed vague commands. And unsurprisingly, they did not make the best combat decisions. The game also has the baton pass from Persona 5, and a new mechanic is basically a limit break. All this stuff makes the game easier overall, and honestly more exciting too. And if you're coming in for Persona 5, you're going to be shocked to see how easy it is to get personas in this game. You just sometimes get them after random battles, no negotiation necessary. That's how the original game was too as well, and it's kind of refreshingly simple in comparison. And even that's one way that the older, simpler Persona 3 actually kind of feels a bit more streamlined than later entries. In general, social links are also less elaborate. The story scenes tend to play out quickly. You're always making a lot of forward progress, even if the actual story takes a while to get going. And I say takes a while because I mean like 10 plus hours before you're really scratching the surface of the story. When the narrative finally starts getting going, it is interesting, but you do have to slog through a lot of mundane slice of life anime-isms to get there. That's always a thing with Persona, but the further back you go, I think the more apparent it is. But the presentation, it's excellent. It's also paced really fast, like everything happens very quickly. So it's a game where you're going to feel lost in quick and for long periods of time. You're always making some kind of progress, either upgrading personas or increasing skills and social links. And the story's constantly feeding you breadcrumbs to keep you engaged. The social stuff is almost all more streamlined than the original, and that might annoy some people who found the more cryptic nature of the original game intriguing. I have to say I appreciate how the game tells you who's available to talk on what day, and lets you get on with things. Like, it's a 70-hour plus RPG. You don't need to waste my time every day hunting around town trying to find a specific social link on a specific day. I don't like that. That's one of the things that made it difficult to return to this game for me, and that's welcome for me. I just don't like playing hide and seek with progression. It's just annoying. So it's really nice to see it all presented a lot clearer in Reload. I haven't talked too much about the presentation, but like, imagine if Persona 3 was Persona 5. Like, they've rebuilt most of the art from the ground up, and it looks in line with Persona 5. But I'll also say this, there's a lot of times where it feels very different than Persona 5. That said, I mean, it's not some graphical showcase like the Final Fantasy VII Remake, but it's got a nice style. Persona is infectious. It feels weird to talk about something as simple as the menu, but I also have to really talk about the menu. It's a major standout. Like, just look at these things. They went above and beyond with the graphic design here. You have something that could have easily been a confusing mess in less experienced hands, but it just feels totally natural. It's a bunch of disparate elements that all come together to somehow work really fantastically. It doesn't feel quite as cohesive as Persona 5, which also had this jazzy soundtrack that perfectly complemented the more lighthearted costume thief antics of the main story. But Persona 3 is a little more grim, gets into some pretty dark subject matter, and sometimes doesn't completely pull it off. Like, a lot of characters kind of feel a little stock anime, you know? Don't necessarily feel like fully fleshed out characters like real people. But that doesn't mean the story isn't strong. It is. It's got a lot of interesting themes, and it set a lot of the conventions that were followed in Persona 4 and 5. But it does take a while to get going. A lot of the first 10 hours are interesting primarily because you're getting to know characters and places and how things work. If you already know that stuff, it's a tough 10 hours, honestly. But as a fan of the series, I don't have much to complain about with Reload, other than the controversial decision to omit some of the features that were present in some of the previous versions. I've talked about this in a couple of list entries in other videos, but Reload is missing the epilogue, The Answer, which was added after it extended the main story past its original endpoint, and there was an entire alternative playable character in Persona 3 Portable. They let you pick a female lead instead of a male one, and that didn't just like switch out the romance options. It actually altered the story in a lot of ways, and for a lot of players out there, the female main character is the definitive version, so it feels kind of unfortunate they just didn't have that at all. Some leakers have claimed there's going to be DLC for Reload that adds stuff like The Answer back into the game, but the publisher said they consider the game complete, so who really knows? Apparently data miners have found references to DLC in the game, so it's possible that's coming later. I hope so, but it's not in the game yet. I wish I could say that Persona 3 Reload is the definitive version of Persona 3, but I guess every version just is going to have at least a couple of drawbacks. Like the original Persona 3 has uncontrollable party members, Portable removes the town exploration, and now Reload is missing features that just should be there. Even with those glaring omissions, though, I'd still recommend the game. The presentation is top-notch. They've given the game enough of a spit shine to put it in with like Persona 5 without completely removing the more experimental nature of the original game. But for die-hard fans of the original, some of the changes might feel like they're going a little too far in courting casual players. Everything about Persona 3 Reload is streamlined to hell and back to keep things moving at a brisk pace. I mean, the game automatically targets enemies with weaknesses for you. It always selects the character with the most damage for healing. It just straight up tells you what attacks use a special button. The game does everything in its power to avoid making battles boring, which honestly I really like. Like, the original Persona 3 could be brutal at times, and this version mostly isn't, and I like that a lot. I said early in the review, it's sometimes a little bit tough to go back to Persona 3, and like most of the reasons for that have been resolved here. You could crank up the difficulty if you really wanted that old school stuff, but it's a different experience. It's not the same game. It's a little polished to the point where maybe some might think it's lost a bit of the original game's edge, but for the most part, I think the changes to Persona 3 Reload are an improvement overall. It's just a shame that some of the bigger additions from later revisions are currently AWOL. That doesn't mean it's not, like, in my opinion, probably the best version of Persona 3 out there, especially for somebody who's already played Persona 3. I know that there may be some other people who like Persona 3 that may not completely agree with that, and they need to put some content back in for me to call this definitive, but man, it is a good package. That's all for today. Leave us a comment. Let us know what you think. If you like this video, click like. If you're not subscribed, now's a great time to do so. We upload brand new videos every day of the week. Best way to see them first is, of course, a subscription, so click subscribe. Don't forget to enable notifications, and as always, thank you very much for watching this video. I'm Falcon. You can follow me on Twitter at Falcon the Hero. We'll see you next time right here on gameranx.
Iori's distressed. Pull the trigger. There! Take this! Get one left! How can I finish the enemy?